Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're here in Pacifica, California with a decorated bass player, beautiful cat, Jim Kerwin. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks. Nice to be here. And thanks for coming over to my place.
It's so great to hang with you, man. Can you talk about the how important it is to have chemistry with somebody on the bandstand as it relates to playing, getting into that fearless mode that we were talking about before? It's not really about the rudiments at that point. It's more about camaraderie, and I wanted for you in your career.
Well, yeah, chemistry is something you don't really have much control over, and that you just hopefully in your life make connections with various people, and I've been lucky to have those connections through my career, where you find a fellow traveler who understands your language and can actually, make you sound better. That's kind of really what it's about, is when you play with someone else or a group of people that make you sound better, and that's what I try to do to them as well. So it's it's reciprocal.
How do you make somebody sound better?
Well, it's kind of it's kind of like a relationship type thing where you finish someone else's sentence,
Right.
and you can obviously see that in music. That's what happens, but a lot of that happens in rhythm, in that element of the music that you're playing, and that sometimes that means leaving space, and that could be right in between notes for a player whose part it is that plays in between your notes, especially being a bass player. And this could go for any style.
Absolutely.
Or even in free playing. And that's in fact where it's really amazing when you find the same elements. If you're playing, at free, uncontrived music, something that hasn't
Not on the page.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Anyway, it's,
And then you lock it, and then there's sort of these.
yeah, I mean, it's like, first of all, it's when you hear someone playing something that you understand it. They've made it clear to you what they're doing, and some people are much easier to then establish, I know what I can do, or maybe I don't. I mean, that's part of it too, is when they make you do things that are beyond what you expect that you can do.
Can you give an early example of that in your career? When you
Well-
realized that someone just stretched you out more than you even knew that you had in your constitution?
Yeah. Yes. George Marsh, it was an early influence. He used to set up these bass and drum clinics, kind of workshops. And I remember, it sounds pretty wacky, but we used to sit around in a circle and either hold hands and pass a note or beat around. And it was kind of like a post office kind of thing. And it was just an exercise to feel that kind of the magic that happens when you're just part of the music and you feel that okay, I know my part is here and there, but I have to listen really intently, especially in a group, to when my part should be there and when I should leave space for someone else to say something that fills it in, but always leading to the next note or the next entrance or whatever is called for in the music. It's difficult to put that into exact terms, but George helped that. George and Mel Graves used to do bass and drum clinics, and I was just kind of beginning where I'd studied classical music, but I was really interested in improvising, and because that's really what I always wanted to be, is an improviser, whether it be jazz or anything. I want to take something from nothing or have another musician stimulate new ideas and put that together with what I know about legitimate music or how music is contrived and make that, create my own composition or group composition at the moment. So I've been inspired by people like that. I played a lot with Larry Blackshear.
Yeah, can you talk about who that cat is?
Larry played vibraphone and was...
Did he play with a lot of vibrato?
On the vibraphone?
Yeah.
Well,
Because
no.
the reason I bring it up
he
is...
didn't use
He didn't use vibrato.
He
Okay.
didn't use the spinning vibrato thing. He played he was kind of more of a Gary Burton style.
Mm-hmm.
He played with four mallets. He, in fact, replaced Gary Burton in the George Shearing quartet. So he was that caliber of a player. He was known well in the Bay Area, but not for that, not really being a soloist, jazz soloist. He played all legit theater, and he could play classical music. He could read anything.
Jingles and...
Jingles,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
He was very successful at that. But he had studied when he was a student as a Fulbright scholar in Germany. So he had a lot of connections there. And when I got out of college, he enlisted me to join his trio with Jim Reynolds, was the drummer, so it was drums, bass, and vibraphone. And we did a lot of touring in the early 80s, 5 years. We did 12 tours to Germany. He had a lot of connections over there, but we built more and more. We did a couple albums. We played festivals. We played television shows. And it was interesting to see how the attraction happened, how we built a career there, because we were a trio from San Francisco. And at the time, Germans and Europeans were really interested in anything coming from America. And if it was from San Francisco, that was just another great reason to, wow, this is a trio from San Francisco. So we have people show up, at the Jazz Keller in Frankfurt, or that was the other thing. The government sponsored clubs, jazz clubs, and they were called youth clubs.
Right, they subsidized. I mean, this still goes on in Europe.
Yeah, but it kind of was filtering away.
Interesting.
Just for the 5 years we were there, towards the end of that, there was less and less of that, and that was a little discouraging. But Larry and that trio, he had a lot of philosophies, kind of used a lot of Oriental philosophies. He spoke a lot on philosophies, but maybe he didn't adhere to them so well himself.
Eastern spirituality kind of?
Yeah, Eastern spirituality. He was into Tai Chi and whatever. But we talked about our trio being really consisting of 4 members. Each of us and the audience was the 4th. And when we would perform, we played a lot of free music, but then it was interspersed with our own originals and then some standards. And Larry can play like ballads, with a 4-mallet style, so amazing. But the idea, especially in the free music, was to feel the energy viscerally from the audience and make that drive what we were doing. That was just as important as listening to whatever the drummer was playing on the ride cymbal. We would just see and feel, the faces looking at us. And at that time in Europe, it was amazing. The audiences we would have that were totally giving it up and listening to everything, and we would give that right back. And that was when I first started viscerally feeling what it is that attracts me to being a musician, which is I actually felt I was somewhat levitating on stage. It was a magical feeling that I felt other times. It's like when everything comes together, not only my own chops or how I feel or how the other people are playing with me, but how the audience is connected. And I remember just tingling and feeling me rise up with the bass, about a foot above the stage, and just really blowing my mind, being a little bit afraid, but realizing this is something that's happening to me right now. I have to remember this. And so that was what that kind of philosophy led to.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully articulated. But with Garcia, you and Garcia had a discussion about playing Fearless. And this is what I want to get at, is because you don't want to forget, you have to bring the audience in, you have to go there first as a band if you're going to expect the audience to raise the collective consciousness and then come back to you, is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about the conversation that you and Jerry had about playing completely fearless?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I would say fearless. I would say entering the realm of danger.
Define danger in this case.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like David Grisman and the bands I play with that I make money doing. I consider myself an improvisational player or an improviser, or maybe a jazz player.
You got to sing for yourself.
But I make a lot of money, or I make some money. I make my money playing bluegrass, which is much more exact and worked out and rehearsed. So when I see bands playing and I hear just how wonderfully they're rehearsed, beautiful singing, all of their parts are perfect, I'm astounded. About 3 songs into it, I'm bored.
Now, why are you bored? Explain this to the
It's
peeps.
because those players haven't figured out how to go beyond what they've rehearsed and perfected. They don't bring an element of danger. They don't take it to the point where they're pushing their own boundaries. It's really wonderful to see players that are that good, but after about 3 tunes, and I think this is subliminal, the people perceive, people that aren't even real music listeners, but that are listening are there, they are perceiving something that's, okay, well, I've kind of seen enough of this, because they're not, it's like watching an accident about to happen on the freeway. You can't take your eyes off it. That's what draws you in. And a musician on stage can be doing the same thing. And you can perceive it without knowing it, I think. I'm more aware of it because I think on those terms. I don't know if I can help it when I'm on stage, or how I can really force that, but it's something that through Larry Blackshear and George Marsh and people like that have helped me to realize that element of danger, which is to is to go beyond what you know you can do. You're never really satisfied with that. And also, you're comfortable with going there.
Well, but I guess the danger is the potential that you could fall on your face.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, but you don't care.
Well,
You can figure out a way to get back on the saddle. I think that's the danger part of it, because what's the security blanket for all these cats after 3 tunes? You're bored, right? They don't want to fall on their face. They want to play it exactly perfect, because like my generation is a Gen Xer. We've grown up being taught that things can be learned in a very linear way, that it can be learned through academia, and most importantly, we're hell-bent on perfection. Yeah. And that's like the idea of music. There's nothing, imperfection is perfection,
Yeah, well...
I mean, you don't want it to be a mess, but I'm saying, like, if you were talking about danger, to me, danger means I'm going way out, and if I fall down, I won't be able to look myself in the mirror in the morning.
Yeah, right, yeah. Well, yeah, being a musician, you have to get away from that self-awareness so much. You got to trade that for awareness of the audience, of all of the spirit that's happening in the room, and that's really hard to describe, but it's something, and I'm not. It doesn't always work for me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I do get nervous and self-intimidated, but most of the time I've learned to just relax about my own fears and nervousness, and look around and try, and not only with the musicians, but the audience. They'll teach me what I'm going to do next. It'll show me what to do next.
That's fascinating.
And now you mentioned Jerry, because I remember sitting and having a talk with him, because I wasn't really. I was a fan of the Grateful Dead early on, and then just kind of left that to go off and play jazz, and I didn't keep up with their records. I didn't follow their shows, but Jerry invited me to see a show at Oakland Coliseum, and then I sat and talked with him later about that, and I asked him what keeps you. I mean, you've been doing this for years. What keeps you interested in playing?
What gets you off? Yeah.
That music. Because he'd kind of make fun of it in a way, because, oh yeah, we're doing all those same tunes and all that. But the point that he made was that I love those guys, the other guys in the band, because they're always throwing something new at me. Doesn't matter we played these tunes a million times. They'll always come up with some kind of new thing to throw at me, and that's what I love. And so, and that's what I admire, and it connects right to what I was saying earlier about being spontaneous and using the energy of the people around you, not only the audience, but the energy of the band.
Well, speaking of the audience, it's just 2 of us, but actually 3 of us, many more people tuning in. So could you play something spontaneous for us on the bass?
Play something spontaneous. Yeah. I'll put down this bass and play the other bass.
Sure.
Spontaneous, I don't know.
Well, I mean, just, improv. So beautiful. I was just sort of lulled into that. But, can you talk to Reggie Workman a while back? And I just kind of wanted to get to Jim Kerwin. I talked to the bass players about this a lot, but it's the idea that you could be getting, especially if you're playing improvisational music and you're going into that danger zone, the idea that the collective group loses the downbeat where the one is. And then they are able to find that and all come back in on that at the same time. And I just wanted to get your concept of the idea that any note can be the one.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And I want just what's your philosophy on that?
Well, it all depends on the context, because free improvisation. I mean, if you're going to take it to the full definition, maybe it's not in 4/4. Maybe it's in 4/4 and then it goes in 2/4. Maybe it's in 3/4. Maybe it's changing all of the time. That's too complex to try to figure out. So it's something that at the moment can be defined by any player. So if you're not really sure where the one is, you have to listen really hard, or you could create your own one and people will follow it. And so there are, that all comes down to kind of just how you play it, what you end up with, how to phrase something.
Is the bass player able to make their own one, or any instrument can make their own one? Or it's a rhythm instrument?
It's a rhythm instrument that might want to do that. I mean, any instrument can do it. But finding the one obviously means that you've defined something, some context where there's measures that are going by with some kind of meter, and then you're dividing them up in a certain way. So a bass player typically is playing in a jazz tune 4/4, so I'm playing in 4/4,
right,
but I'm not necessarily leading or following any chord changes. But so if I was going to follow chord changes and put a different chord on every 2 beats, that's the context, is then chord changes. And if you're in the middle of an improvisation and someone gets off and can't find one, then obviously there aren't enough people defining it somehow.
Right.
And sometimes that's the intention. So it all depends on the context. And I'm not one to have some hard and fast rule that says that improvisation needs to be in 4/4, or the bass player has to hold it all together.
Well, I'm curious, when you started to do the Warfield gigs or the shows with David and Jerry, there was no trap drummer. So how did you guys like to disguise the one? Jerry always liked to disguise that, but I'm saying, like, how did you?
Those are more defined tunes,
right,
that had defined grooves, which is, there's a performance practice of what each player should play to make that groove work. I'm trying to think of It just reminded me of something. Oh, I had the great pleasure of being asked to play with Gary Burton for one performance at a TED convention, and he was presenting the great young, especially at that point, Julian Lage, guitar player.
Yeah, the Marsh told me about that. He's burning it up now. He's on fire now. Yeah.
Well, this was just when Gary Burton was discovering.
He was breaking him out.
Yeah. And the first thing he did was play this TED convention in Monterey, and I was asked to come play bass. There was no drums, and we're going to play 4 or 5 tunes, and we were playing off of Gary's latest record. Hadn't been released yet, but it was Christian McBride was the bass player. So Gary sent me the recordings, and the first tune we were going to play was Back Home in Indiana, which is, the bowed had a bass melody. Anyway, I learned that and learned a bass, arco bass solo, and we had 20-minute rehearsal before we played this 20-minute show.
It was guitar, vibes, and bass?
And bass.
No drums.
No drums.
Fantastic.
And big audience, and I knew there were going to be a lot of famous people out there, but we were going to do...
Famous is overrated, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, people that I think...
I dig.
And that's what happened, because that was our first tune. I was very nervous, but I nailed it. I played very well, and we finished that tune, and there was a big round of applause, and I looked right in front of me, in the front of the audience was Herbie Hancock, all dressed in black leather, and I'm glad
He's famous. I dig Herbie.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we played a couple of more tunes, and then we played Night in Tunisia, and Gary asked Herbie to come up and sit in with us. And this goes to the point we were talking about.
This is great. Go ahead.
Because then, I mean, Night in Tunisia has got built-in form, and it's a groove. There's certain chord changes that go through it, and it's complicated. It has changing Latin and bebop, swing groove. And Julian, he's a guitar player. He's going to help me, but he's not going to really hold it together. And the vibes they're kind of a nebulous thing sometimes, and they're not really known, and Gary's not really known to be a rhythmic player. So here's Herbie Hancock taking a solo, or even when he was not taking a solo, he was playing clusters of chords and all of this amazing, colorful pianistic things.
Rhythmic stuff, though.
But it wasn't rhythmic.
It wasn't.
It was all over the place, and wonderful, but I couldn't listen to it. I couldn't really focus on that because I had to hold that form down because I thought that was appropriate to do. We were playing on Night in Tunisia. We weren't playing free music. It would have been easy for me to go right with him and to really
if
take
it was
out.
Free, you could go out, but you were playing a tune. You didn't want to lose the form of the tune.
Right, and I had to make a decision, a conscious decision. Yeah. And in my head, my voice was telling me, I've got to be Ron Carter. I've got to be Ron Carter here. I've got
Rock
to
of Gibraltar,
that bass line. I got to show there's the B section. There's that Latin groove. And, so it was very uncomfortable at first. And then I figured, well, I know what I need to do now because that's what I call being appropriate. Now, I wasn't being very dangerous at that point. I was allowing the rest of the band to be dangerous and to over the top of my form on that tune. Of course, Gary was totally nailing it and all that. But I still couldn't tell you. I mean, I'd love to hear recording that back because it sounded like Herbie was like all over the place with clusters of chords, and it was wonderful. But I couldn't focus too much because I had a lot of responsibility. So that's the context of band playing and what a bass player.
Especially guys that really have never played before. I mean, that's another challenge to it. I mean, it's remarkable. When you're playing with great players, you don't necessarily need to have a lot of familiarity, especially if you're playing a tune like Night in Tunisia.
Yeah, sometimes in that case, a rehearsal isn't going to be that much so beneficial. Maybe you'll learn how to start the tune or how you end the tune so you don't look like an idiot. But then again, sometimes that's looking like an idiot is actually what I was talking about. That's the danger part.
That's the liberating part. I'm with you. I
Yeah.
know for most people, feeling like an idiot is not a good thing. But
Right. But that is, in fact, what I love about playing improvisation. I hate it too, but it actually helps. It's helped me in my own life to be comfortable with stepping into the void and knowing my foot's going to fall and I'm going to follow that with something else, but it's a black hole there. And I went through right before that Gary Burton thing, I hadn't played the bass for a year and a half after my wife's death of cancer and me raising 2 kids. So that was a huge step for me to get back on the horse. That happened to be the one gig that did it because I was
rightfully
charged
so.
up.
I mean, it's an amazing gig.
But the point of going out on stage and being ready for anything was something that I learned in real life, dealing with a loved one that was going through a process of cancer, those are just dark holes that you walk into, and sometimes there's good news, sometimes there's bad, but it's keeping yourself going forward and keeping a focus.
That's right, and that's a very important point. I mean, pushing yourself out and then realizing it's dark, but then being able to go into that void and coming out the other side stronger because of it. I mean, what are you still learning about today as a musician?
Well,
I mean, it doesn't have to be a theory or chops thing. I mean, the guys,
Yeah.
I mean, masters are still, Herbie's still learning every day. So what are you learning about?
yeah. Well, I've one of my biggest problems of my career is that I am totally interested in many different styles, and so lately I've been playing tango music with the group that does like authentic Astor Piazzolla. We're actually using Astor Piazzolla's charts, and that's a whole other way of playing the bass. It's very aggressive and there's no subtlety to that kind of playing, and it uses the bow. All of those things are challenging me.
It's a clave beat, or is it clave?
No, it's not the rhythm so much, but it's actually reading. There's most of that stuff's written out. It's not an improvisational style, but it's another context of stylistic playing. So that's, and I've had opportunities lately to play in orchestras and concert bands, jazz. I do a lot of bluegrass playing. It's basically that's what my career has become, is playing a lot of different styles. It doesn't help me to be, to give my brand some kind of thing, that says, oh, that's the kind of player he is. I know what kind of player I am. I don't really care what other people play. But when I'm on the stand or when I'm rehearsing with the band, that's who I want to be, is the best bass player for that context. So I like different contexts. That keeps me on my toes. It keeps the element of danger there. It's our job not to look bored if we're doing something that we've done a million times. It's to find new ways to do that same thing, and try to, just be fresh with it as much as you can.
In the sextet in Grisman's sextet that's playing at Freight and Salvage on Friday, you haven't played a lot of gigs this year. Do you taking a page out of Garcia's, what he said when Kreutzmann or Mickey or Phil or Bobby, they're always throwing new stuff at him, right? They're throwing the kitchen sink, keeping the tunes fresh. Is that something that David might say we might do this in a faster tempo, or is that stuff that just comes out, or does it come out organically on the stage? Like, are you in advance? Do you know?
With Grisman, he pretty much will let you know at the rehearsal, and he sent the list of tunes and had made some mention about certain tunes that we're going to play in a different context. So I've been kind of looking into that, but I don't necessarily want to perfect that until we have a rehearsal. We're actually going to rehearse here tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, that's going to be fun. George won't be here, but we have a lot of work melodically with all the players. There's so many parts and harmonies, and the arrangements that need to be worked out or remind us. Yeah, David's context is another kind of thing. He's much more of a controlled, arrangement kind of person, and he has been, from when I first started playing with him 33 years ago. And it was actually, I was playing a jazz session at George Marsh's practice room with a guitar player, Dimitri, and we finished a little trio session. We're having a great time, and George says, "Stick around, David Grisman's going to come by." David came by, we played through some tunes, and David hired me the next day, and that was 33 years
Someone tells me Marsh set that whole thing up.
inadvertently.
It's cool. So 33 years.
Yeah, 1985. What? Yeah.
Do you believe that you guys have increased vocabulary of music on the bandstand in that time? I'm always fascinated with
Yes. Well, I think that we've influenced David's.
Yeah. In what way?
Especially early on when David at that point he was just starting to be recognized by like Downbeat magazine.
Right.
And he thought that he can get into the jazz festival scene.
The niche.
And kind of broaden his audience. And that's why he actually fired the band that I started with, he phased out and hired George to play drums and Dimitri Vangelos to play guitar. It was a new band because now we can actually play some authentic jazz and we can play David's dog tunes, arranged tunes. And that turned into some of the early recordings we did with Sven Asmussen playing in New York, and we did a recording with him. Sven Asmussen is an amazing jazz violinist if you haven't heard of him. And a little bit later, we played a lot with Stefan Grappelli. So that was what David was looking to branch out into the jazz world. He eventually realized that he wasn't really, it seems to me that he realized that he wasn't really gaining a bigger audience. And
because jazz festivals now there are R&B acts playing jazz. So anyway.
Yeah, but he was a new thing in the jazz world a little bit. He was actually recognized and Downbeat and various magazines, and people wrote about him. Not necessarily as a jazz artist, but somebody that fits into that. And we do a lot of jazz. David's band really is a jazz band, but we play in other contexts within that. But then when he started playing, when he reunited with Jerry Garcia, that's when I saw what I thought, in a way, David controls things to a fault in my mind, because I'm a much more of an improviser and comfortable with let's just wing it, or let's do a 20-minute version of a tune. Now, David never really wanted to do that, but as soon as we started playing with Jerry brought that element. He was really much more of a jazz consciousness kind of player. Oh. And so that's
was it a nonverbal thing? Like he just look at David, give him an eye, say, keep going, play as many bars as you want. Like, how did he draw it out of him?
That was mostly what happened. But actually, I remember some discussions where I saw both of them moving. I saw Jerry going, no, I want to play that arrangement. I want to play that harmony part. How does that harmony part go? How are we going to do that ending with that tight ending? He
wanted it more polished. He was looking for a little more slickness,
Well, he saw that he did, and he knew that David had great ideas for that, but Jerry's natural, normal self was to just spin. That's how most of those records got. I think we did 5 or 6 CDs. They all came out. Some of them came out after Jerry passed, but that's because we didn't organize it except for maybe the first record, or maybe the Not for Kids Only was actually contrived to be a recording project. But all the rest was just Jerry showing up at David's house, and me and Joe Craven being called to come over and just kind of accompany their whims. And sometimes we do a tune 2 takes or 1 take, 3 takes, sometimes 6 or 10 takes. So that showed you the parameters of how far Jerry could take it, because he was kind of a 1 take kind of guy. Maybe if he forgot the words or something, he'd try it again. And so that was, in a way, was David Grisman's education of how to be that way. And he became much freer in that sense.
Some people, I'm sure, that traces back to Vassar and Olden in the Way, too. I mean, it was almost a reawakening for David in some ways.
Yeah.
Because they were stretching in Olden in the Way a little bit back in the early 70s. Vassar was an incredible fiddle player.
Yes, yeah, I had great times playing with Vassar. But again,
You play with Vassar too?
Oh yeah,
Oh, this is
yeah.
fantastic.
Actually, I played for a short while in Olden in the Way after Jerry died. Then that became Olden in the Gray, and they hired a woman.
Well, wait, hold on. John Conn had passed away, and then you took...
Yeah, John Conn had passed away, right, yeah. And so I kind
Olden
of...
in the Gray, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but it was right before that we did a few concerts. I have a few photos from that era. And it was Herb Peterson playing banjo and singing. And
Oh, big fan. I love her. Yeah, you know, I just wanted you to talk about your concept of love and how you bring love to the world.
wow.
As you know, through not just through your music, but what is your concept of love?
Well, that's a deep question.
It's a Bohemian question.
It is, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, probably the most obvious thing is that I love playing the bass. It's a visceral
You're
thing
in
for
love
me.
with the apparatus.
I do. The apparatus, the whole thing, I make love to this instrument. I don't think of it in that way.
No, I think most musicians would say that.
Yeah.
And, you know, they know what they mean.
But, you know, if I'm bored or if I'm anxious or if I'm whatever mood I'm in and I see my bass, I'll just go pick that bass up and play something and feel like, wow, now I'm centered. So it gives back. So that's kind of what love is too. What you give into it, you get back. And in fact, that's what we were talking about earlier about the audience. Is if you know the audience will show you that energy, and you give that right back, and that's the part that I love so much. So yes, it is love that drives me to do that, and the love that I feel in music, you know, gives me energy to do the rest of the things that I do in my life. And
is it easy? What about unconditional love? Because like with the instrument, you're getting back. You know, you're putting it out, and then you're getting back. So it's sort of a reciprocal thing. But I mean, I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea of saying love. They want it, especially if, you know, when in a human context. If they don't receive something back, then they're dismayed. It's the unconditional component of it,
Yeah.
you know. Easier with an inanimate object, you know, where
Yeah.
you're getting the vibrations and you're starting to. It's almost a yogic thing, you know.
Yeah.
But it's not a human, you know. But I like the fact. I mean, how do you best bring an audience into playing the music? How do you bring them in as a fourth member?
I don't know. I really, it's really
Because you were talking
all
about the
in my
European
mind.
audiences, you could really feel I mean, part of it's, you know, what's their intention for being there too? Are they there to party? Are they there to womanize? Are they there to
Yeah.
really lock in? But
Well,
I'm saying, how do you go there in order to get them
my
to go
experiences with European audiences, and this is back in the 80s, is that they don't come there to party. They come serious, especially in Germany. They're a little too serious at times. And I would get a kick out of that too. We played some really great free music festivals. The MERS Festival was one. And there was a moment there was a band from Japan, and they were playing 3 guys with Stratocasters and drums, playing very loud with violin bows. And it was just ridiculous.
That's
It was
insane.
silly.
That's insane.
And I was laughing because they were doing all this nutty stuff. And I'd look at the audience, and the Germans were all perfectly serious and, oh, what is this about? Oh, there must be something here. And I just, it cracked me up. You know, so part of that is just me trying to decipher the different cultures that are happening. But that's how amazing music can be. There's a lot of factors that make music, and especially when you get into free improvisation. It's not going to be so easy as a listener. You really do have to pay attention and focus. So that's what if you were going to ask of how I connect with the audience, is that I'm trying to pay attention as much as I can to what I'm doing at that moment, being in the moment. That's the most important thing. I can't just let my muscle memory take over. I really have to listen to every note I'm playing and how it's connecting with not only the drummer, of course, if there's a drummer, but everyone around me. Sometimes I play in big bands, and even in a big band, I'm constantly listening really hard. Even though I have a part in front of me, sometimes it's all written out and the arrangements are all dynamically, arranged. Especially during the solo, when someone's soloing and I'm playing through the changes and backing them up, I'm trying to listen to that soloist and respond to the soloist in many different ways. I mean, a few of those ways could be if I'm hearing a soloist playing soft, well, of course I'm going to take it down and play it soft with them. Or if I'm going to try to build dynamically that solo. Sometimes if I'm hearing a soloist melodically building and going higher and higher, I'll make my bass lines go lower and lower. I'll little contrast and
counterpoint. Yeah,
counterpoint.
yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
I'm using all of those elements
That's perfect.
that I learned from studying, but mostly just from listening, as to how music is composed, and try to create that spontaneously. So all of the elements that make good composition, I'm trying to use all those elements and respond in the moment with the soloist or the drummer who's kicking that too. Drummers do that all the time. There's a context that a rhythm section can create behind a soloist or behind whatever. That context is the 16th notes that happen in between the notes. These are just quarter notes. But if I put a context of a certain kind of a 16th note, there's a triplet. So there's a context of another rhythm, and a drummer does that a lot too. That is what gives commentary to the soloist. The soloist can be really busy, and I'll be not so busy. And those contrasts are, I think, what makes a dynamic band sound. And I'm always trying to make the soloist sound better. And I'm using my judgment as what sounds better. But it seems to be working for me. And I love, that's what challenges me, because that's the part, even though it's all written out usually, or at least parts of it are written out, I have the ability to create a composition spontaneously at that point. And the bass player gets to do that a lot, because people don't realize it, but we're improvising bass lines constantly. We're going through the chord changes, but sometimes we don't land on a root. Sometimes we land on a third and a fifth, and that pushes us another place.
Yeah, John Hurd was like that. Is always like that. It's just,
Yeah.
it's. Before we wrap, you told me about this mercurial cat bop player, but went by the name Raphael, and I was hoping that you could play a homage to Raphael. Maybe his spirit has left us. Maybe he's here in San Rafael still, but play something for Raph.
Yeah. Well, Raphael was somebody I met one evening at a jazz club. We were both subs for a bass piano gig. It was just like an afternoon is what it was. And he shows up really late, and he looks really crazy. Didn't know who this guy was, and he gave me his card actually, and it just said Raphael on it, and it said bebop or whatever, and it had anyway. I never heard of this guy. He showed up just in time to sit at the piano, and he said, "What would you like to play?" I said, "Well, let's play a monk tune." And his eyes lit up, and he went into an introduction and played this huge, beautiful cadenza, like classical, but it was like monk playing classical. And it was so authentic. It sounded like Thelonious Monk right there, but even more, pianistic. Well, whatever. He wasn't Monk, he was being someone else.
Sure, he's been himself.
Yeah. And then he led me right into the tune, and every tune we played like that. Most of the time he would do these amazing introductions, and I was just totally blown away. He was like this angelic, but very strange. He had part of his face was drooping down. He obviously had been through a lot. He probably looked like he weighed about 80 pounds, kind of a tall, thin guy. During the break, he pulled me by the arm outside of the club and around to this alleyway because he wanted to tell me something. And he told me, I played with Red Rodney back in the day, and I knew Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and I was there when bebop was created. I was 17 at the time. But I wanted to tell you, back then I thought that those guys were doing heroin and all of that, and I thought that that's how they got so great. But man, they had their chops together first, and I didn't know that. And so I'm telling you,
Get your chops together before you get on the job.
Exactly. He actually began that little talk with saying, my name's Raphael, and I've been declared dead on arrival 6 times. And, he lived most of his life in rehabilitation. And in other words, a real sad story. But he was a great pianist. And I never heard anything of him since. And I asked all my musician friends. He was just staying with somebody in San Rafael at the time. And I don't even know who. And I had his card. I called the number, never did get through to him. Anyway, he's somebody that just was a mystery to me until I mentioned it to a few people. And they said, yeah, no, he did play with Red Rodney. He was a 17-year-old piano player, and he's on Red Rodney's first record. And it's like early bebop. And that was the cat. So, yeah, Raphael.
Ode to Raph. Jim Kerwin, love always. See you on Friday, my brother, and thank you for being part of the program.
Thanks for being here.
This is the Jake Feinberg Show. See you later.